Chapter 69 of The Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Caroline Hemmerly Kunkel, Columbus, Ohio. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 69. The Inquiry. Monsieur de Villefort kept the promise he had made to Madame Danglars, to endeavor to find out how the Count of Monte Cristo had discovered the history of the house at Auteuil. He wrote the same day for the required information to Monsieur de Beauvilla, who, from having been an inspector of prisons, was promoted to a high office in the police, and the latter begged for 2 days' time to ascertain exactly who would be most likely to give him full particulars. At the end of the second day, Monsieur de Villefort received the following note. The person called the Count of Monte Cristo is an intimate acquaintance of Lord Wilmore, a rich foreigner, who is sometimes seen in Paris, and who is there at this moment. He is also known to the Abbé Busoni, a Sicilian priest of high repute in the East, where he has done much good. Monsieur de Villefort replied by ordering the strictest inquiries to be made respecting these two persons. His orders were executed, and the following evening he received these details. The abbé, who was in Paris only for a month, inhabited a small 2-storied house behind Saint-Sulpice. There were 2 rooms on each floor, and he was the only tenant. The lower 2 rooms consisted of a dining room with a table, chairs, and a sideboard of walnut, and a wainscoted parlor without ornaments, carpet, or timepiece. It was evident that the abbé limited himself to objects of strict necessity. He preferred to use the sitting room upstairs, which was more library than parlor, and was furnished with theological books and parchments, in which he delighted to bury himself for months at a time, according to his valet de chambre. His valet looked at the visitors through a sort of wicket, and if their faces were unknown to him, or displeased him, he replied that the abbé was not in Paris, an answer which satisfied most persons, because the abbé was known to be a great traveler. Besides, whether at home or not, whether in Paris or Cairo, the abbé always left something to give away, which the valet distributed through the wicket in his master's name. The other room near the library was a bedroom, a bed without curtains, 4 armchairs, and a couch covered with yellow Utrecht velvet, composed, with a prie-dieu, all its furniture. Lord Wilmore resided in Rue Fontaine Saint-Georges. He was one of those English tourists who consume a large fortune in traveling. He hired the apartment in which he lived furnished, passed only a few hours in the day there, and rarely slept there. One of his peculiarities was never to speak a word of French, which he however wrote with great facility. The day after this important information had been given to the king's attorney, a man alighted from a carriage at the corner of the Rue Férou, and rapping at an olive-green door, asked if the Abbé Busoni were within. "No, he went out early this morning," replied the valet. "I might not always be content with that answer," replied the visitor, "for I come from one to whom everyone must be at home. But have the kindness to give the Abbé Busoni—" "I told you he was not at home," repeated the valet. "Then on his return give him that card and this sealed paper. Will he be at home at 8 o'clock this evening?" "Doubtless, unless he is at work, which is the same as if he were out." "I will come again at that time," replied the visitor, who then retired. At the appointed hour the same man returned in the same carriage, which, instead of stopping this time at the end of the Rue Férou, drove up to the green door. He knocked, and it opened immediately to admit him. From the signs of respect the valet paid him, he saw that his note had produced a good effect. "Is the abbé at home?" asked he. "Yes, he is at work in his library, but he expects you, sir," replied the valet. The stranger ascended a rough staircase, and before a table illumined by a lamp whose light was concentrated by a large shade, while the rest of the apartment was in partial darkness, he perceived the abbé in a monk's dress, with a cowl on his head, such as was used by learned men of the Middle Ages. "Have I the honor of addressing the Abbé Busoni?" asked the visitor. "Yes, sir," replied the abbé, "and you are the person whom Monsieur de Beauvilla, formerly an inspector of prisons, sends to me from the prefect of police?" "Exactly, sir." "One of the agents appointed to secure the security of Paris?" "Yes, sir," replied the stranger with a slight hesitation, and blushing. The abbé replaced the large spectacles, which covered not only his eyes but his temples, and sitting down motioned to his visitor to do the same. "I am at your service, sir," said the abbé, with a marked Italian accent. "The mission with which I am charged, sir," replied the visitor, speaking with hesitation, "is a confidential one on the part of him who fulfills it, and him by whom he is employed." The abbé bowed. "Your probity," replied the stranger, "is so well known to the prefect that he wishes as a magistrate to ascertain from you some particulars connected with the public safety, to ascertain which I am deputed to see you. It is hoped that no ties of friendship or humane consideration will induce you to conceal the truth. Provided, sir, the particulars you wish for do not interfere with my scruples or my conscience. I am a priest, sir, and the secrets of confession, for instance, must remain between me and God, and not between me and human justice. Do not alarm yourself, monsieur, we will duly respect your conscience." At this moment the abbé pressed down his side of the shade, and so raised it on the other, throwing a bright light on the stranger's face, while his own remained obscured. "Excuse me, abbé," said the envoy of the prefect of the police, "but the light tries my eyes very much." The abbé lowered the shade. "Now, sir, I am listening. Go on." "I will come at once to the point. Do you know the Count of Monte Cristo?" "You mean Monsieur Zaccone, I presume?" "Zaccone? Is not his name Monte Cristo?" "Monte Cristo is the name of an estate, or rather of a rock, and not a family name." "Well, be it so. Let us not dispute about words. And since Monsieur de Monte Cristo and Monsieur Zaccone are the same—" "Absolutely the same." "Let us speak of Monsieur Zaccone." "Agreed." "I asked you if you knew him." "Extremely well." "Who is he?" "The son of a rich shipbuilder in Malta." "I know that is the report, but, as you are aware, the police does not content itself with vague reports." "However," replied the abbé, with an affable smile, "when that report is in accordance with the truth, everybody must believe it, the police as well as all the rest." "Are you sure of what you assert?" "What do you mean by that question?" "Understand, sir, I do not in the least suspect your veracity. I ask if you are certain of it." "I knew his father, Monsieur Zaccone." "Ah, indeed?" "And when a child I often played with the son in the timber yards." "But whence does he derive the title of count?" "You are aware that may be bought." "In Italy?" "Everywhere." "And his immense riches, whence does he procure them? They may not be so very great." "How much do you suppose he possesses?" "From 150 to 200,000 livres per annum." "That is reasonable," said the visitor. "I have heard he had 3 or 4 millions." 200,000 per annum would make 4 millions of capital." "But I was told he had 4 millions per annum." "That is not probable." "Do you know this island of Monte Cristo?" "Certainly, everyone who has come from Palermo, Naples, or Rome to France by sea must know it, since he has passed close to it and must have seen it." "I am told it is a delightful place." "It is a rock." "And why has the count bought a rock?" "For the sake of being a count. In Italy one must have territorial possessions to be a count." "You have, doubtless, heard the adventures of Monsieur Zaccone's youth?" "The father's?" "No, the son's. I know nothing certain. At that period of his life I lost sight of my young comrade." "Was he in the wars?" "I think he entered the service." "In what branch?" "In the navy." "Are you not his confessor?" "No, sir, I believe he is a Lutheran." "A Lutheran?" "I say, I believe such is the case. I do not affirm it. Besides, liberty of conscience is established in France." "Doubtless, and we are not now inquiring into his creed, but his actions. In the name of the prefect of police, I ask you what you know of him." "He passes for a very charitable man. Our Holy Father, the Pope, has made him a knight of Jesus Christ for the services he rendered to the Christians in the East. He has 5 or 6 rings as testimonials from Eastern monarchs of his services." "Does he wear them?" "No, but he is proud of them. He is better pleased with rewards given to the benefactors of man than to his destroyers." "He is a Quaker, then?" "Exactly, he is a Quaker, with the exception of the peculiar dress." "Has he any friends?" "Yes, everyone who knows him is his friend." "But has he any enemies?" "One only." "What is his name?" "Lord Wilmore." "Where is he?" He is in Paris just now. Can he give me any particulars? Important ones. He was in India with Zaccone. Do you know his abode? It's somewhere in the Chaussée d'Antin, but I know neither the street nor the number. Are you at variance with the Englishman? I love Zaccone, and he hates him. We are consequently not friends. Do you think the Count of Monte Cristo had ever been in France before he made this visit to Paris? To that question I can answer positively. No, sir, he had not, because he applied to me 6 months ago for the particulars he required, and as I did not know when I might again come to Paris, I recommended Monsieur Cavalcanti to him. Andrea? No, Bartolomeo, his father. Now, sir, I have but one question more to ask, and I charge you, in the name of honor, of humanity, and of religion, to answer me candidly. What is it, sir? Do you know with what design Monsieur de Monte Cristo purchased a home at Authier? Certainly, for he told me. What is it, sir? To make a lunatic asylum of it, similar to that founded by the Count of Bissone at Palermo. Do you know about that institution? I have heard of it. It is a magnificent charity. Having said this, the abbé bowed to imply he wished to pursue his studies. The visitor either understood the abbé's meaning or had no more questions to ask. He arose, and the abbé accompanied him to the door. You are a great almsgiver, said the visitor, and although you are said to be rich, I will venture to offer you something for your poor people. Will you accept my offering? I thank you, sir. I am only jealous in one thing, and that is that the relief I give should be entirely from my own resources. However, my resolution, sir, is unchangeable, but you have only to search for yourself, and you will find, alas, but too many objects upon whom to exercise your benevolence. The abbé once more bowed as he opened the door. The stranger bowed and took his leave, and the carriage conveyed him straight to the house of Monsieur de Villefort. An hour afterwards the carriage was again ordered, and from this time it went to the Rue Fontaine Saint-Georges, and stopped at No. 5, where Lord Wilmore lived. The stranger had written to Lord Wilmore, requesting an interview which the latter had fixed for 10 o'clock. As the envoy of the prefect of police arrived 10 minutes before 10, he was told that Lord Wilmore, who was precision and punctuality personified, was not yet come in, but that he would be sure to return as the clock struck. The visitor was introduced into the drawing-room, which was like all other furnished drawing-rooms: a mantelpiece with 2 modern Sèvres vases, a timepiece representing Cupid with his bent bow, a mirror with an engraving on each side, one representing Homer carrying his guide, the other Belisarius begging, a grayish paper, red and black tapestry. Such was the appearance of Lord Wilmore's drawing-room. It was illuminated by lamps with ground-glass shades, which gave only a feeble light, as if out of consideration for the envoy's weak sight. After 10 minutes' expectation the clock struck 10. At the 5th stroke the door opened, and Lord Wilmore appeared. He was rather above the middle height, with thin reddish whiskers, light complexion, and light hair, turning rather grey. He was dressed with all the English peculiarity, namely in a blue coat with gilt buttons and high collar, in the fashion of 1811, a white kerseymere waistcoat, and nankeen pantaloons, 3 inches too short, but which were prevented by straps from slipping up to the knee. His first remark on entering was, "You know, sir, I do not speak French." "I know you do not like to converse in our language," replied the envoy. "But you may use it," replied Lord Wilmore. "I understand it." "And I," replied the visitor, changing his idiom, "know enough of English to keep up the conversation. Do not put yourself to the slightest inconvenience." "Ah?" said Lord Wilmore, with that tone which is only known to natives of Great Britain. The envoy presented his letter of introduction, which the latter read with English coolness, and having finished, "I understand," said he, "perfectly." Then began the questions, which were similar to those which had been addressed to the Abbé Busoni. But as Lord Wilmore, in the character of the count's enemy, was less restrained in his answers, they were more numerous. He described the youth of Monte Cristo, who, he said, at 10 years of age, entered the service of one of the petty sovereigns of India who make war on the English. It was there Wilmore had first met him and fought against him, and in that war Zaccone had been taken prisoner, sent to England, and consigned to the hulks, whence he had escaped by swimming. Then began his travels, his duels, his caprices. Then the insurrection in Greece broke out, and he had served in the Grecian ranks. While in that service he had discovered a silver mine in the mountains of Thessaly, but he had been careful to conceal it from everyone. After the battle of Navarino, when the Greek government was consolidated, he asked of King Otho a mining grant for that district, which was given him. Hence that immense fortune, which, in Lord Wilmore's opinion, possibly amounted to 1 or 2 millions per annum, a precarious fortune which might be momentarily lost by the failure of the mine. "But," asked the visitor, "do you know why he came to France?" "He is speculating in railways," said Lord Wilmore, "and as he is an expert chemist and physicist, he has invented a new system of telegraphy which he is seeking to bring to perfection." "How much does he spend yearly?" asked the prefect. "Not more than 500 or 600,000 francs," said Lord Wilmore. "He is a miser." Hatred evidently inspired the Englishman, who, knowing no other reproach to bring on the count, accused him of avarice. "Do you know his house at Auteuil?" "Certainly." "What do you know respecting it?" "Do you wish to know why he bought it?" "Yes." "The count is a speculator, who will certainly ruin himself in experiments. He supposes there is in the neighborhood of the house he has bought a mineral spring equal to those at Bagneres, Luchon, and Cotteret. He is going to turn his house into a Badu, as the Germans term it. He has already dug up all the garden 2 or 3 times to find the famous spring, and, being unsuccessful, he will soon purchase all the contiguous houses. Now, as I dislike him, and hope his railway, his electric telegraph, or his search for baths will ruin him, I am watching for his discomfiture, which must soon take place." "What was the name of your quarrel?" "When he was in England, he seduced the wife of one of my friends." "Why do you not seek revenge?" "I have already fought 3 duels with him," said the Englishman, "the first with the pistol, the second with the sword, and the third with the sabre." "And what was the result of those duels?" "The first time he broke my arm, the second he wounded me in the breast, and the third time made this large wound." The Englishman turned down his shirt collar, and showed a scar, whose redness proved it to be a recent one. "So that, you see, there is a deadly feud between us." "But," said the envoy, "you do not go about it in the right way to kill him, if I understand you correctly." "Ah," said the Englishman, "I practice shooting every day, and every other day Grisier comes to my house." This was all the visitor wished to ascertain, or rather, all the Englishman appeared to know. The agent arose, and having bowed to Lord Wilmore, who returned his salutation with the stiff politeness of the English, he retired. Lord Wilmore, having heard the door close after him, returned to his bedroom, where with one hand he pulled off his light hair, his red whiskers, his false jaw, and his wound, to resume the black hair, dark complexion, and pearly teeth of the Count of Monte Cristo. It was M. de Villefort, and not the prefect, who returned to the house of M. de Villefort. The procureur felt more at ease, although he had learned nothing really satisfactory, and, for the first time since the dinner party at Auteuil, he slept soundly. End of chapter 69. Recording by Caroline Hemmerly Kunkel, Columbus, Ohio. Of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Caroline Hemmerly Kunkel, Columbus, Ohio. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 70. The Ball. It was in the warmest days of July, when in due course of time the Saturday arrived upon which the ball was to take place at M. de Morcerf's. It was 10 o'clock at night. The branches of the great trees in the garden of the count's house stood out boldly against the azure canopy of heaven, which was studded with golden stars, but where the last fleeting clouds of a vanishing storm yet lingered. From the apartments on the ground floor might be heard the sound of music, with the whirl of the waltz and galop, while brilliant streams of light shone through the openings of the Venetian blinds. At this moment the garden was only occupied by about 10 servants, who had just received orders from their mistress to prepare the supper, the serenity of the weather continuing to increase. Until now it had been undecided whether the supper should take place in the dining room or under a long tent erected on the lawn, but the beautiful blue sky, studded with stars, had settled the question in favor of the lawn. The gardens were illuminated with colored lanterns, according to the Italian custom, and, as is usual in countries where the luxuries of the table, the rarest of all luxuries in their complete form, are well understood. The supper table was loaded with wax lights and flowers. At the time the Countess of Morcerf returned to the rooms, after giving her orders, many guests were arriving, more attracted by the charming hospitality of the Countess than by the distinguished position of the Count; for, owing to the good taste of Mercédès, one was sure of finding some devices at her entertainment worthy of describing, or even copying in case of need. Madame Danglars, in which the events we have related had caused deep anxiety, had hesitated about going to Madame de Morcerf's when during the morning her carriage happened to meet that of Villefort. The latter made a sign, and when the carriages had drawn close together, said, "You are going to Madame Morcerf's, are you not?" "No," replied Madame Danglars, "I am too ill." "You are wrong," replied Villefort, significantly. "It is important that you should be seen there." "Do you think so?" asked the baroness. "I do." "In that case I will go." And the two carriages passed on towards their different destinations. Madame Danglars therefore came, not only beautiful in person, but radiant with splendor. She entered by one door at the time when Mercédès appeared at the door. The countess took Albert to meet Madame Danglars. He approached, paid her some well-merited compliments on her toilette, and offered his arm to conduct her to a seat. Albert looked around him. "You are looking for my daughter?" said the baroness, smiling. "I confess it," replied Albert. "Could you have been so cruel as not to bring her?" "Calm yourself. She has met Mademoiselle de Villefort, and has taken her arm. See, they are following us, both in white dresses, one with a bouquet of camellias, the other with one of myosotis. But tell me." "Well, what do you wish to know?" "Will not the Count of Monte Cristo be here tonight?" 17, replied Albert. "What do you mean?" "I only mean that the count seems the rage," replied the viscount, smiling, "and that you are the 17th person that has asked me the same question. The count is in fashion. I congratulate him upon it." "And have you replied to everyone as you have to me?" "Ah, to be sure, I have not answered you. Be satisfied, we shall have this lion. We are among the privileged ones." "Were you at the opera yesterday?" "No." "He was there." "Ah, indeed, and did the eccentric person commit any new originality?" "Can he be seen without doing so?" "Elssler was dancing in the Diable Bleuté. The Greek princess was in ecstasies. After the cachucha had placed a magnificent ring on the stem of a bouquet, and threw it to the charming danseuse, who, in the third act, to do honor to the gift, reappeared with it on her finger. And the Greek princess, will she be here?" "No, you will be deprived of that pleasure. Her position in the count's establishment is not sufficiently understood. Wait, leave me here, and go and speak to Madame de Villefort, who is trying to attract your attention." Albert bowed to Madame Danglars, and advanced towards Madame de Villefort, whose lips opened as he approached. "I wager anything," said Albert, interrupting her, "that I know what you were about to say." "Well, what is it?" "If I guess rightly, will you confess it?" "Yes." "On your honor?" "On my honor." "You were going to ask me if the Count of Monte Cristo had arrived, or was expected." "Not at all; it is not of him that I am thinking now. I was going to ask you if you had received any news of Monsieur Franz." "Yes, yesterday." "What did he tell you?" "That he was leaving at the same time as his letter." "Well, now then, the count?" "The count will come, of that you may be satisfied." "You know that he has another name besides Monte Cristo?" "No, I did not know it." "Monte Cristo is the name of an island, and he has a family name." "I never heard it." "Well, then, I am better informed than you. His name is Zaccone." "It is possible." "He is a Maltese." "That is also possible." "The son of a ship owner." "Really, you should relate all this aloud. You would have the greatest success." "He served in India, discovered a mine in Thessaly, and comes to Paris to establish a mineral water cure at Auteuil." "Well, I'm sure," said Morcerf, "this is indeed news. Am I allowed to repeat it?" "Yes, but cautiously. Tell one thing at a time, and do not say I told you." "Why so?" "Because it is a secret just discovered." "By whom?" "The police." "Then the news originated——" "At the prefect's last night. Paris, you can understand, is astonished at the sight of such unusual splendor, and the police have made inquiries." "Well, well, nothing more is wanting than to arrest the count as a vagabond on the pretext of his being too rich." "Indeed, that doubtless would have happened if his credentials had not been so favorable." "Poor count! And is he aware of the danger he has been in?" "I think not." Then it will be but charitable to inform him. When he arrives, I will not fail to do so." Just then a handsome young man with bright eyes, black hair, a glossy moustache, respectfully bowed to Madame de Villefort. Albert extended his hand. "Madame," said Albert, "allow me to present you Monsieur Maximilien Morrel, captain of the Spahis, one of our best, and, above all, one of our bravest officers." "I have already had the pleasure of meeting this gentleman at Auteuil, at the house of the Count of Monte Cristo," replied Madame de Villefort, turning away with marked coldness of manner. This answer, and especially the tone in which it was uttered, chilled the heart of poor Morrel. But a recompense was in store for him. Turning around, he saw near the door a beautiful fair face, whose large blue eyes were, without any marked expression, fixed upon him, while the bouquet of myosotis was gently raised to her lips. This salutation was so well understood that Morrel, with the same expression in his eyes, placed his handkerchief to his mouth. And these two living statues, whose hearts beat so violently under their marble aspect, separated from each other by the whole length of the room, forgot themselves for a moment, or rather, forgot the world in their mutual contemplation. They might have remained much longer lost in one another, without anyone noticing their abstraction. The Count of Monte Cristo had just entered. We have already said that there was something in the count which attracted universal attention wherever he appeared. It was not the coat, unexceptional in its cut, though simple and unornamented. It was not the plain white waistcoat. It was not the trousers that displayed the foot so perfectly formed. It was none of these things that attracted the attention. It was his pale complexion, his waving black hair, his calm and serene expression, his dark and melancholy eye, his mouth chiseled with such marvelous delicacy, which so easily expressed such high disdain. These were what fixed the attention of all upon him. Many men might have been handsomer, but certainly there could be none whose appearance was more significant, if the expression may be used. Everything about the count seemed to have its meaning, for the constant habit of thought which he had acquired had given an ease and vigor to the expression of his face, and even to the most trifling gesture, scarcely to be understood. Yet the Parisian world is so strange that even all this might not have won attention had there not been connected with it a mysterious story gilded by an immense fortune. Meanwhile, he advanced through the assemblage of guests under a battery of curious glances towards Madame de Morcerf, who, standing before a mantelpiece ornamented with flowers, had seen his entrance in a looking-glass placed opposite the door, and was prepared to receive him. She turned towards him with a serene smile just at the moment he was bowing to her. No doubt she fancied the count would speak to her, while on his side the count thought she was about to address him. But both remained silent, and after a mere bow, Monte Cristo directed his steps to Albert, who received him cordially. "Have you seen my mother?" asked Albert. "I have just had the pleasure," replied the count, "but I have not seen your father." "See, he is down there, talking politics with that little group of great geniuses." "Indeed," said Monte Cristo, "and so those gentlemen down there are men of great talent? I should not have guessed it. And for what kind of talent are they celebrated? You know there are different sorts." "That tall, harsh-looking man is very learned. He discovered, in the neighborhood of Rome, a kind of lizard with a vertebra more than lizards usually have, and he immediately laid his discovery before the Institute. The thing was discussed for a long time, but finally decided in his favor. I can assure you the vertebra made a great noise in the learned world, and the gentleman, who was only a knight of the Legion of Honor, was made an officer." "Come," said Monte Cristo, "this cross seems to me to be wisely awarded. I suppose, had he found another additional vertebra, they would have made him a commander." "Very likely," said Albert. "And who can that person be who has taken it into his head to wrap himself up in a blue coat embroidered with green?" "Oh, that coat is not his own idea. It is the Republic's, which deputed David to devise a uniform for the academicians." "Indeed," said Monte Cristo. "So this gentleman is an academician?" "Within the last week he has been made one of the learned assembly." "And what is his special talent?" "His talent? I believe he thrusts pins through the heads of rabbits. He makes fowls eat madder, and punches the spinal marrow out of dogs with whalebone." "And he is made a member of the Academy of Sciences for this?" "No, of the French Academy." "But what has the French Academy to do with all this?" "I was going to tell you. It seems—" "That his experiments have very considerably advanced the cause of science, doubtless?" "No, that his style of writing is very good." This must be very flattering to the feelings of the rabbits whose heads he has thrust pins, to the fowls whose bones he has dyed red, and to the dogs whose spinal marrow has been punched out." Albert laughed. "And the other one?" demanded the count. "That one?" "Yes, the third." "The one in the dark blue coat?" "Yes." "He is a colleague of the count, and one of the most active opponents to the idea of providing the Chamber of Peers with a uniform. He was very successful upon that question. He stood badly with the liberal papers, but his noble opposition to the wishes of the court is now getting him into favor with the journalists. They talk of making him an ambassador." "And what are his claims to the peerage?" "He has composed 2 or 3 comic operas, written 4 or 5 articles in the Siècle, and voted 5 or 6 years on the ministerial side." "Bravo, Viscount," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "You are a delightful cicerone, and now you will do me a favor, will you not?" "What is it?" "Do not introduce me to any of these gentlemen, and should they wish it, you will warn me." Just then the count felt his arm pressed. He turned round; it was Danglars. "Ah, is it you, baron?" said he. "Why do you call me baron?" said Danglars. "You know that I care nothing for my title. I am not like you, viscount. You like your title, do you not?" "Certainly," replied Albert, "seeing that without my title I should be nothing, while you, sacrificing the baron, would still remain the millionaire." "Which seems to me the finest title under the royalty of July," replied Danglars. "Unfortunately," said Monte Cristo, "one's title to a millionaire does not last for life, like that of a baron, peer of France, or academician. For example, the millionaires Franck and Pullman of Frankfort, who have just become bankrupts." "Indeed," said Danglars, becoming pale. "Yes, I received the news this evening by a courier. I had about 1 million in their hands, but, warned in time, I withdrew it a month ago." "Ah, mon Dieu!" exclaimed Danglars, "they have drawn on me for 200,000 francs." "Well, you can throw out the draft; their signature is worth 5%. "Yes, but it is too late," said Danglars. "I have honored their bills." "Then," said Monte Cristo, "here are 200,000 francs gone after." "Hush, do not mention these things," said Danglars. Then, approaching Monte Cristo, he added, "especially before young Monsieur Cavalcanti," after which he smiled and turned toward the young man in question. Albert had left the count to speak to his mother, Danglars to converse with young Cavalcanti. Monte Cristo was for an instant alone. Meanwhile the heat became excessive. The footmen were hastening through the rooms with waiters loaded with ices. Monte Cristo wiped the perspiration from his forehead, but drew back when the waiter was presented to him. He took no refreshment. Madame de Morcerf did not lose sight of Monte Cristo. She saw that he took nothing, and even noticed his gesture of refusal. "Albert," she asked, "did you notice that?" "What, mother?" "That the count has never been willing to partake of food under the roof of Monsieur de Morcerf." "Yes, but then he breakfasted with me. Indeed, he made it his first appearance in the world on that occasion." "But your house is not Monsieur de Morcerf's," murmured Mercédès, "and since he has been here I have watched him." "Well?" "Well, he has taken nothing yet." "The count is very temperate." Mercédès smiled sadly. "Approach him," said she, "and when the next waiter passes, insist upon his taking something." "But why, mother?" "Just to please me, Albert," said Mercédès. Albert kissed his mother's hand and drew near the count. Another salver passed, loaded like the preceding ones. She saw Albert attempt to persuade the count, but he obstinately refused. Albert rejoined his mother. She was very pale. "Well," said she, "you see he refuses?" "Yes, but why need this annoy you?" "You know, Albert, women are singular creatures. I should like to have seen the count take something in my house, if only an ice. Perhaps he cannot reconcile himself to the French style of living, and might prefer something else." "Oh, no, I have seen him eat of everything in Italy. No doubt he does not feel inclined this evening." "And besides," said the countess, "accustomed as he is to burning climates, possibly he does not feel the heat as we do." "I do not think that, for he has complained of feeling almost suffocated, and asked why the Venetian blinds were not opened as well as the windows." "In a word," said Mercédès, "it was a way of assuring me that his abstinence was intended," and she left the room. A minute afterwards the blinds were thrown open, and through the jessamine and clematis that overhung the window one could see the garden ornamented with lanterns, and the supper laid under the tent. Dancers, players, talkers, all uttered an exclamation of joy. Everyone inhaled with delight the breeze that floated in. At the same time Mercédès reappeared, paler than before, but with that imperturbable expression of countenance which she sometimes wore. She went straight to the group of which her husband formed the centre. "Do not detain those gentlemen here, Count," she said. "They would prefer, I should think, to breathe in the garden rather than suffocate here, since they are not playing." "Ah," said a gallant old general, who, in 1809, had sung "Partons pour la Syrie," "we will not go alone to the garden." "Then," said Mercédès, "I will lead the way." Turning towards Monte Cristo, she added, "Count, will you oblige me with your arm?" The count almost staggered at these simple words. Then he fixed his eyes on Mercédès. It was only a momentary glance, but it seemed to the countess to have lasted for a century, so much was expressed in that one look. He offered his arm to the countess. She took it, or rather, just touched it with her little hand, and they together descended the steps, lined with rhododendrons and camellias. Behind them, by another outlet, a group of about 20 persons rushed into the garden with loud exclamations of delight. End of chapter 70. Recording by Caroline Hemmerly Kunkel, Columbus, Ohio.
Chapter 71 of The Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 71. Bread and Salt. Madame de Morcerf entered an archway of trees with her companion. It led through a grove of lindens to a conservatory. "It was too warm in the room, was it not, Count?" she asked. "Yes, madame, and it was an excellent idea of yours to open the doors and the blinds." As he ceased speaking, the count felt the hand of Mercédès tremble. "But you," he said, "with that light dress, and without anything to cover you but that gauze scarf, perhaps you feel cold?" "Do you know where I am leading you?" said the countess, without replying to the question. "No, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "but you see I make no resistance. We are going to the greenhouse that you see at the other end of the grove." The count looked at Mercédès as if to interrogate her, but she continued to walk on in silence, and he refrained from speaking. They reached the building, ornamented with magnificent fruits, which ripened at the beginning of July in the artificial temperature which takes the place of the sun, so frequently absent in our climate. The countess left the arm of Monte Cristo and gathered a bunch of muscatel grapes. "See, count," she said, with a smile so sad in its expression that one could almost detect the tears on her eyelids. "See, our French grapes are not to be compared, I know, with yours of Sicily and Cyprus, but you will make allowance for our northern sun?" The count bowed, but stepped back. "Do you refuse?" said Mercédès in a tremulous voice. "Pray excuse me, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "but I never eat muscatel grapes." Mercédès let them fall, and sighed. A magnificent peach was hanging against an adjoining wall, ripened by the same artificial heat. Mercédès drew near and plucked the fruit. "Take this peach, then," she said. The count again refused. "What, again?" she exclaimed, in so plaintive an accent that it seemed to stifle a sob. "Really, you pain me." A long silence followed. The peach, like the grapes, fell to the ground. "Count," added Mercédès with a supplicating glance, "there is a beautiful Arabian custom which makes eternal friends of those who have together eaten bread and salt under the same roof." "I know it, madame," replied the count, "but we are in France, and not in Arabia, and in France eternal friendships are as rare as the custom of dividing bread and salt with one another." "But," said the countess breathlessly, with her eyes fixed on Monte Cristo, whose arm she convulsively pressed with both hands, "we are friends, are we not?" The count became pale as death, the blood rushed to his heart, and then again rising, dyed his cheeks with crimson. His eyes swam like those of a man suddenly dazzled. "Certainly we are friends," he replied. "Why should we not be?" The answer was so little like the one Mercédès desired, that she turned away to give vent to a sigh which sounded more like a groan. "Thank you," she said, and they walked on again. They went the whole length of the garden without uttering a word. "Sir," suddenly exclaimed the countess, after their walk had continued 10 minutes in silence, "is it true you have seen so much, travelled so far, and suffered so deeply?" "I have suffered deeply, madame," answered Monte Cristo. "But now you are happy?" "Doubtless," replied the count, "since no one hears me complain." "And your present happiness, has it softened your heart?" "My present happiness equals my past misery," said the count. "Are you not married?" asked the countess. "I married?" exclaimed Monte Cristo, shuddering. "Who could have told you so?" "No one told me you were, but you have frequently been seen at the opera with a young and lovely woman." "She is a slave whom I bought at Constantinople, madame, the daughter of a prince. I have adopted her as my daughter, having no one else to love in the world." "You live alone, then?" "I do." "You have no sister, no son, no father?" "I have no one." "How can you exist thus without anyone to attach you to life?" "It is not my fault, madame. At Malta I loved a young girl, was on the point of marrying her, when a war came and carried me away. I thought she loved me well enough to wait for me, and even to remain faithful to my memory. When I returned she was married. This is the history of most men who have passed 20 years of age. Perhaps my heart was weaker than the hearts of most men, and I suffered more than they would have done in my place, that is all." The countess stopped for a moment, as if gasping for breath. "Yes," she said, "and you have still preserved this love in your heart. One can only love once. And did you ever see her again?" "Never." "Never?" "I never returned to the country where she lived." "To Malta?" "Yes, Malta." "She is then now at Malta?" "I think so." "And have you forgiven her for all she has made you suffer?" "Her, yes." "But only her? Do you then still hate those who separated you?" "I hate them? Not at all. Why should I?" The countess placed herself before Monte Cristo, still holding in her hand a portion of the perfumed grapes. "Take some," she said. "Madame, I never eat muscatel grapes," replied Monte Cristo, as if the subject had not been mentioned before. The countess dashed the grapes into the nearest thicket with a gesture of despair. "Inflexible man!" she murmured. Monte Cristo remained as unmoved as if the reproach had not been addressed to him. Albert at this moment ran in. "Oh, mother," he exclaimed, "such a misfortune has happened!" "What has happened?" asked the countess, as though awakening from a sleep to the realities of life. "Did you say a misfortune? Indeed, I should expect misfortunes." "Well?" "Monsieur de Villefort is here." "Well?" "He comes to fetch his wife and daughter." "Why so?" "Because Madame de Saint-Méran is just arrived in Paris, bringing the news of M. de Saint-Méran's death, which took place on the first stage after he left Marseilles. Madame de Villefort, who was in very good spirits, would neither believe nor think of the misfortune, but Mademoiselle Valentine, as the first words, guessed the whole truth, notwithstanding all the precautions of her father. The blow struck her like a thunderbolt, and she fell senseless." "And how was M. de Saint-Méran related to Mademoiselle de Villefort?" said the count. "He was her grandfather on her mother's side. He was coming here to hasten her marriage with Franz." "Ah, indeed? So Franz must wait. Why was not M. de Saint-Méran also grandfather to Mademoiselle Danglars?" "Albert, Albert," said Madame de Morcerf, in a tone of mild reproof, "what are you saying? Ah, count, he esteems you so highly, tell him that he has spoken amiss." And she took 2 or 3 steps forward. Monte Cristo watched her with an air so thoughtful and so full of affectionate admiration, that she turned back and grasped his hand. At the same time she seized that of her son and joined them together. "We are friends, are we not?" she asked. "Oh, madame, I do not presume to call myself your friend, but at all times I am your most respectful servant." The countess left with an indescribable pang in her heart, and before she had taken 10 steps, the count saw her raise her handkerchief to her eyes. "Do not my mother and you agree?" asked Albert, astonished. "On the contrary," replied the count. "Did you not hear her declare that we were friends?" They re-entered the drawing-room, which Valentine and Madame de Villefort had just quitted. It is perhaps needless to add that Morrel departed almost at the same time. End of chapter 71.
Of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 72. Madame de Saint-Meran. A gloomy scene had indeed just passed at the house of M. de Villefort. After the ladies had departed for the ball, whither all the entreaties of Madame de Villefort had failed in persuading him to accompany them, the procureur had shut himself up in his study, according to his custom, with a heap of papers calculated to alarm anyone else, but which generally scarcely satisfied his inordinate desires. But this time the papers were a mere matter of form. Villefort had secluded himself, not to study, but to reflect; and with the door locked, and orders given that he should not be disturbed excepting for important business, he sat down in his armchair and began to ponder over the events, the remembrance of which had, during the last 8 days, filled his mind with so many gloomy thoughts and bitter recollections. Then, instead of plunging into the mass of documents piled before him, he opened the drawer of his desk, touched a spring, and drew out a parcel of cherished memoranda, amongst which he had carefully arranged, in characters only known to himself, the names of all those who, either in his political career, in money matters, at the bar, or in his mysterious love affairs, had become his enemies. Their number was formidable, now that he had begun to fear; and yet these names, powerful though they were, had often caused him to smile with the same kind of satisfaction experienced by a traveller who from the summit of a mountain beholds at his feet the craggy eminences, the almost impassable paths, and the fearful chasms, through which he has so perilously climbed. When he had run over all these names in his memory, again read and studied them, commenting meanwhile upon his lists, he shook his head. "No," he murmured, "none of my enemies would have waited so patiently and laboriously for so long a space of time that they might now come and crush me with this secret. Sometimes, as Hamlet says, foul deeds will rise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes. But, like a phosphoric light, they rise but to mislead. The story has been told by the Corsican to some priest, who in turn has repeated it. M. de Monte Cristo may have heard it, and to enlighten himself. But why should he wish to enlighten himself upon the subject?" asked Villefort, after a moment's reflection. "What interest can this M. de Monte Cristo, or M. Zacconi, son of a shipowner of Malta, discoverer of a mine in Thessaly, now visiting Paris for the first time, what interest, I say, can he take in discovering a gloomy, mysterious, and useless fact like this? However, among all the incoherent details given to me by the Abbé Busoni and by Lord Wilmore, by that friend and that enemy, one thing appears certain and clear in my opinion, that in no period, in no case, in no circumstance, could there have been any contact between him and me." But Villefort uttered words which even he himself did not believe. He dreaded not so much the revelation, for he could reply to or deny its truth. He cared little for that men, Tekel, Abhasen, which appeared suddenly in letters of blood upon the wall. But what he was really anxious to discover was, whose hand had traced them. While he was endeavoring to calm his fears, and instead of dwelling upon the political future that had so often been the subject of his ambitious dreams, was imagining a future limited to the enjoyments of home, in fear of awakening the enemy that had so long slept, the noise of a carriage sounded in the yard. Then he heard the steps of an aged person ascending the stairs, followed by tears and lamentations, such as servants always give vent to when they wish to appear interested in their master's grief. He drew back the bolt of his door, and almost directly an old lady entered, unannounced, carrying her shawl in her arm and her bonnet in her hand. The white hair was thrown back from her yellow forehead, and her eyes, already sunken by the furrows of age, now almost disappeared beneath the eyelids swollen with grief. "Oh, sir," she said, "oh, sir, what a misfortune! I shall die of it. Oh, yes, I shall certainly die of it." And then, falling upon the chair nearest the door, she burst into a paroxysm of sobs. The servants, standing in the doorway, not daring to approach nearer, were looking at Noirtier's old servant, who had heard the noise from his master's room, and run there also, remaining behind the others. Villefort rose and ran towards his mother-in-law, for it was she. "Why, what can have happened?" he exclaimed. "What has thus disturbed you? Is M. de Saint-Meran with you?" "M. de Saint-Meran is dead," answered the old marchioness, without preface and without expression. She appeared to be stupefied. Villefort drew back, and clasping his hands together, exclaimed, "Dead? So suddenly?" "A week ago," continued Madame de Saint-Meran, "we went out together in the carriage after dinner. M. de Saint-Meran had been unwell for some days; still, the idea of seeing our dear Valentine again inspired him with courage, and notwithstanding his illness he would leave. At 6 leagues from Marseilles, after having eaten some of the lozenges he is accustomed to take, he fell into such a deep sleep that it appeared to me unnatural. Still, I hesitated to wake him, although I fancied his face was flushed, and that the veins of his temples throbbed more violently than usual. However, as it became dark and I could no longer see, I fell asleep. I was soon aroused by a piercing shriek, as from a person suffering in his dreams, and he suddenly threw his head back violently. I called the valet, I stopped the postilion, I spoke to M. de Saint-Meran, I applied my smelling salts, but all was over, and I arrived at Aix by the side of a corpse." Villefort stood with his mouth half open, quite stupefied. "Of course you sent for a doctor?" "Immediately, but as I have told you, it was too late." "Yes, but then he could tell of what complaint the poor marquis had died." "Oh, yes, sir, he told me. It appears to have been an apoplectic stroke." "And what did you do then?" M. de Saint-Meran had always expressed the desire, in case his death happened during his absence from Paris, that his body should be brought to the family vault. I had him put into a leaden coffin, and I am preceding him by a few days." "Oh, my poor mother!" said Villefort, "to have such duties to perform at your age, after such a blow!" "God has supported me through all. And then, my dear marquis, he would certainly have done everything for me that I performed for him. It is true that since I left him I seem to have lost my senses. I cannot cry. At my age they say we have no more tears. Still, I think that when one is in trouble one should have the power of weeping." "Where is Valentine, sir? It is on her account I am here. I wish to see Valentine." Villefort thought it would be terrible to reply that Valentine was at a ball, so he only said that she had gone out with her stepmother, and that she should be fetched. "Oh, this instant, sir, this instant, I beseech you," said the old lady. Villefort placed the arm of Madame de Saint-Meran within his own, and conducted her to his apartment. "Rest yourself, mother," he said. The marchioness raised her head at this word, and beholding the man who so forcibly reminded her of her deeply regretted child, who still lived for her in Valentine, she felt touched at the name of mother, and bursting into tears, she fell on her knees before an armchair, where she buried her venerable head. Villefort left her to the care of the women, while old Barrois ran half scared to his master; for nothing frightens old people so much as when death relaxes its vigilance over them for a moment, in order to strike some other old person. Then, while Madame de Saint-Meran remained on her knees praying fervently, Villefort sent for a cab, and went himself to fetch his wife and daughter from Madame de Morcerf's. He was so pale when he appeared at the door of the ballroom that Valentine ran to him, saying, "Oh, father, some misfortune has happened." "Your grandmamma has just arrived, Valentine," said M. de Villefort. "And grandpapa?" inquired the young girl, trembling with apprehension. M. de Villefort only replied by offering his arm to his daughter. It was just in time, for Valentine's head swam, and she staggered. Madame de Villefort instantly hastened to her assistance, and aided her husband in dragging her to the carriage, saying, "What a singular event! Who could have thought it? Oh, yes, it is indeed strange." And the wretched family departed, leaving a cloud of sadness hanging over the rest of the evening. At the foot of the stairs, Valentine found Barrois awaiting her. "M. Noirtier wishes to see you tonight," he said in an undertone. "Tell him I will come when I leave my dear grandmamma," she replied, feeling with true delicacy that the person to whom she could be of most service just then was Madame de Saint-Méran. Silent caresses, heart-wrung sobs, broken sighs, and burning tears were all that passed in this sad interview, while Madame de Villefort, leaning on her husband's arm, maintained all outward forms of respect, at least towards the poor widow. She soon whispered to her husband, "I think it would be better for me to retire, with your permission, for the sight of me appears still to afflict your mother-in-law." Madame de Saint-Méran heard her. "Yes, yes," she said softly to Valentine, "let her leave, but do you stay." Madame de Villefort left, and Valentine remained alone beside the bed, for the procureur, overcome with astonishment at the unexpected death, had followed his wife. Meanwhile, Barrois had returned for the first time to old Noirtier, who, having heard the noise in the house, had, as we have said, sent his old servant to inquire the cause. On his return, his quick intelligent eye interrogated the messenger. "Alas, sir," exclaimed Barrois, "a great misfortune has happened. Madame de Saint-Méran has arrived, and her husband is dead." M. de Saint-Méran and Noirtier had never been on strict terms of friendship. Still, the death of one old man always considerably affects another. Noirtier let his head fall upon his chest, apparently overwhelmed and thoughtful. Then he closed one eye in token of inquiry. "Mademoiselle Valentine?" Noirtier nodded his head. "She is at the ball, as you know, since she came to say good-bye to you in full dress." Noirtier again closed his left eye. "Do you wish to see her?" Noirtier again made an affirmative sign. "Well, they have gone to fetch her, no doubt, from Madame de Morcerf's. I will await her return, and beg her to come up here. Is that what you wish for?" "Yes," replied the invalid. Barrois, therefore, as we have seen, watched for Valentine, and informed her of her grandfather's wish. Consequently, Valentine came up to Noirtier on leaving Madame de Saint-Méran, who, in the midst of her grief, had at last yielded to fatigue and fallen into a feverish sleep. Within reach of her hand they placed a small table upon which stood a bottle of orangeade, her usual beverage, and a glass. Then, as we have said, the young girl left the bedside to see M. Noirtier. Valentine kissed the old man, who looked at her with such tenderness that her eyes again filled with tears, whose sources he thought must be exhausted. The old gentleman continued to dwell upon her with the same expression. "Yes, yes," said Valentine, "you mean that I have yet a kind grandfather left, do you not?" The old man intimated that such was his meaning. "Oh, yes, happily I have," replied Valentine. "Without that, what would become of me?" It was 1 o'clock in the morning. Barrois, who wished to go to bed himself, observed that after such sad events everyone stood in need of rest. Noirtier would not say that the only rest he needed was to see his child, but wished her good night, for grief and fatigue had made her appear quite ill. The next morning she found her grandmother in bed. The fever had not abated; on the contrary, her eyes glistened, and she appeared to be suffering from violent nervous irritability. "Oh, dear grandmamma, are you worse?" exclaimed Valentine, perceiving all these signs of agitation. "No, my child, no," said Madame de Saint-Méran; "but I was impatiently waiting for your arrival, that I might send for your father." "My father?" inquired Valentine uneasily. "Yes, I wish to speak to him." Valentine durst not oppose her grandmother's wish, the cause of which she did not know, and an instant afterwards Villefort entered. "Sir," said Madame de Saint-Méran, without using any circumlocution, and as if fearing that she had no time to lose, "you wrote to me concerning the marriage of this child." "Yes, madame," replied Villefort; "it is not only projected, but arranged." "Your intended son-in-law is named M. Franz d'Épinay?" "Yes, madame." "Is he not the son of General d'Épinay, who was on our side, and who was assassinated some days before the usurper returned from the island of Elba?" "The same." "Does he not dislike the idea of marrying the granddaughter of a Jacobin?" "Our civil dissensions are now happily extinguished, mother," said Villefort. "M. d'Épinay was quite a child when his father died. He knows very little of M. Noirtier, and will meet him, if not with pleasure, at least with indifference." "Is it a suitable match?" "In every respect." "And the young man?" "Is regarded with universal esteem." "You approve of him?" "He is one of the most well bred young men I know." During the whole of this conversation Valentine had remained silent. "Well, sir," said Madame de Saint Méran, after a minute's reflection, "I must hasten the marriage, for I have but a short time to live." "You, madame? You, dear mamma?" exclaimed M. de Villefort and Valentine at the same time. "I know what I am saying," continued the marchioness. "I must hurry you, so that as she has no mother she may at least have a grandmother to bless her marriage. I am all that is left to her belonging to my poor Renée, whom you have so soon forgotten, sir." "Oh, madame," said Villefort, "you forget that I was obliged to give a mother to my child." "A stepmother is never a mother, sir. But this is not to the purpose. Our business concerns Valentine. Let us leave the dead in peace." All this was said with such exceeding rapidity that there was something in the conversation that seemed like the beginning of delirium. "It shall be as you wish, madame," said Villefort, "more especially since your wishes coincide with mine, and as soon as M. d'Épinay arrives in Paris——" "My dear grandmother," interrupted Valentine, "consider decorum, the recent death. You would not have me marry under such sad auspices." "My child," exclaimed the old lady sharply, "let us hear none of the conventional objections that deter weak minds from preparing for the future. I also was married at the deathbed of my mother, and certainly I have not been less happy on that account." "Still, that idea of death, madame," said Villefort. "Still? Always. I tell you I am going to die. Do you understand? Well, before dying, I wish to see my son-in-law. I wish to tell him to make my child happy. I wish to read in his eyes whether he intends to obey me. In fact, I will know him. I will," continued the old lady, with a fearful expression, "that I may rise from the depths of my grave to find him, if he should not fulfil his duty." "Madame," said Villefort, "you must lay aside these exalted ideas, which almost assume the appearance of madness. The dead, once buried in their graves, rise no more. And I tell you, sir, that you are mistaken. This night I have had a fearful sleep. It seemed as though my soul were already hovering over my body. My eyes, which I tried to open, closed against my will. And what will appear impossible above all to you, sir, I saw with my eyes shut, in the spot where you are now standing, issuing from that corner where there is a door leading to Madame de Villefort's dressing room, I saw, I tell you, silently enter a white figure." Valentine screamed. "It was the fever that disturbed you, madame," said Villefort. "Doubt, if you please, but I am sure of what I say. I saw a white figure, and as if to prevent my discrediting the testimony of only one of my senses, I heard my glass removed, the same which is there now on the table." "Oh, dear mother, it was a dream!" "So little was it a dream that I stretched my hand towards the bell, but when I did so the shade disappeared. My maid then entered with a light." "But she saw no one?" "Phantoms are visible to those only who ought to see them. It was the soul of my husband. Well, if my husband's soul can come to me, why should not my soul reappear to guard my granddaughter? The tie is even more direct, it seems to me." "Oh, madame," said Villefort, deeply affected in spite of himself, "do not yield to these gloomy thoughts. You will long live with us, happy, loved, and honored. We will make you forget——" "Never, never, never!" said the marchioness. "When does M. d'Épinay return?" "We expect him every moment." "It is well. As soon as he arrives, inform me. We must be expeditious. And then I also wish to see a notary, that I may be assured that all our property returns to Valentine." "Oh, grandmamma," murmured Valentine, pressing her lips on the burning brow, "do you wish to kill me? Oh, how feverish you are! We must not send for a notary, but for a doctor." "A doctor?" said she, shrugging her shoulders. "I am not ill, I am thirsty, that is all. What are you drinking, dear grandmamma?" "The same as usual, my dear. My glass is there on the table. Give it to me, Valentine." Valentine poured the orangeade into a glass, and gave it to her grandmother, with a certain degree of dread, for it was the same glass, she fancied, that had been touched by the spectre. The marchioness drained the glass at a single draught, and then turned on her pillow, repeating, "The notary, the notary." M. de Villefort left the room, and Valentine seated herself at the bedside of her grandmother. The poor child appeared herself to require the doctor she had recommended to her aged relative. A bright spot burned in either cheek, her respiration was short and difficult, and her pulse beat with feverish excitement. She was thinking of the despair of Maximilian, when he should be informed that Madame de Saint-Méran, instead of being an ally, was unconsciously acting as his enemy. More than once she thought of revealing all to her grandmother, and she would not have hesitated a moment if Maximilian Morrel had been named Albert de Morcerf or Raoul de Château. But Morrel was of plebeian extraction, and Valentine knew how the haughty Marquise de Saint-Meran despised all who were not noble. Her secret had each time been repressed, when she was about to reveal it, by the sad conviction that it would be useless to do so, for, were it once discovered by her father and mother, all would be lost. 2 hours passed thus. Madame de Saint-Méran was in a feverish sleep, and the notary had arrived. Though his coming was announced in a very low tone, Madame de Saint-Méran arose from her pillow. "The notary!" she exclaimed; "let him come in." The notary, who was at the door, immediately entered. "Go, Valentine," said Madame de Saint-Méran, "and leave me with this gentleman." "But, grandmamma——" "Leave me. Go." The young girl kissed her grandmother, and left with her handkerchief to her eyes. At the door she found the valet de chambre, who told her that the doctor was waiting in the dining room. Valentine instantly ran down. The doctor was a friend of the family, and at the same time one of the cleverest men of the day, and very fond of Valentine, whose birth he had witnessed. He had himself a daughter, about her age, but whose life was one continued source of anxiety and fear to him, from her mother having been consumptive. "Oh," said Valentine, "we have been waiting for you with such impatience, Monsieur d'Avrigny. But first of all, how are Madeleine and Antoinette?" Madeleine was the daughter of Monsieur d'Avrigny, and Antoinette his niece. Monsieur d'Avrigny smiled sadly. "Antoinette is very well," he said, "and Madeleine tolerably so. But you sent for me, my dear child. It is not your father or Madame de Villefort who is ill. As for you, although we doctors cannot divest our patients of nerves, I fancy you have no further need of me than to recommend you do not allow your imagination to take too wide a field." Valentine colored. M. d'Avrigny carried the science of divination almost to a miraculous extent, for he was one of the physicians who always work upon the body through the mind. "No," she replied, "it is for my poor grandmother. You know the calamity that has happened to us, do you not?" "I know nothing," said M. d'Avrigny. "Alas," said Valentine, restraining her tears, "my grandfather is dead." "Monsieur de Saint-Meran?" "Yes." "Suddenly?" "From an apoplectic stroke." "An apoplectic stroke?" repeated the doctor. "Yes, and my poor grandmother fancies that her husband, whom she never left, has called her, and that she must go and join him. Oh, M. d'Avrigny, I beseech you, do something for her." "Where is she?" "In her room with the notary." "And M. Noirtier?" "Just as he was, his mind perfectly clear, but the same incapability of moving or speaking." "And the same love for you, eh, my dear child?" "Yes," said Valentine, "he was very fond of me." "Who does not love you?" Valentine smiled sadly. "What are your grandmother's symptoms?" "An extreme nervous excitement, and a strangely agitated sleep. She fancied this morning, in her sleep, that her soul was hovering above her body, which she at the same time watched. It must have been delirium. She fancies, too, that she saw a phantom enter her chamber, and even heard the noise it made in touching her glass." "It is singular," said the doctor. "I was not aware that Madame de Saint-Meran was subject to such hallucinations." "It is the first time I ever saw her in this condition," said Valentine, "and this morning she frightened me so that I thought her mad. And my father, who you know is a strong-minded man, himself appeared deeply impressed." "We will go and see," said the doctor. "What you tell me seems very strange." The notary here descended, and Valentine was informed that her grandmother was alone. "Go upstairs," she said to the doctor.
"And you?"
"Oh, I dare not; she forbade my sending for you, and, as you say, I am myself agitated, feverish, and out of sorts. I will go and take a turn in the garden to recover myself." The doctor pressed Valentine's hand, and while he visited her grandmother, she descended the steps. We need not say which portion of the garden was her favorite walk. After remaining for a short time in the parterre surrounding the house, and gathering a rose to place in her waist or hair, she turned into the dark avenue which led to the bench. Then from the bench she went to the gate. As usual, Valentine strolled for a short time among her flowers, but without gathering them. The mourning in her heart forbade her assuming this simple ornament, though she had not yet had time to put on the outward semblance of woe. She then turned towards the avenue. As she advanced, she fancied she heard a voice speaking her name. She stopped, astonished. Then the voice reached her ear more distinctly, and she recognized it to be that of Maximilian. Chapter 72.
Chapter 73 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Silva. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 73. The Promise. Part 1. It was indeed Maximilien Morrel who had passed a wretched existence since the previous day. With the instinct peculiar to lovers, he had anticipated, after the return of Madame de Saint-Meran and the death of the Marquis, that something would occur at Monsieur de Villefort's in connection with his attachment for Valentine. His presentiments were realized, as we shall see, and his uneasy forebodings had goaded him pale and trembling to the gate under the chestnut trees. Valentine was ignorant of the cause of this sorrow and anxiety, and as it was not his accustomed word for visiting her, she had gone to the spot simply by accident, or perhaps through sympathy. Morrel called her, and she ran to the gate. "You here at this hour?" said she. "Yes, my poor girl," replied Morrel. "I come to bring and to hear bad tidings." "This is indeed a house of mourning," said Valentine. "Speak, Maximilien, although the cup of sorrow seems already full." "Dear Valentine," said Morrel, endeavoring to conceal his own emotion, "listen, I entreat you. What I am about to say is very serious. When are you to be married?" "I will tell you all," said Valentine. "From you I have nothing to conceal. This morning the subject was introduced, and my dear grandmother, on whom I depended as my only support, not only declared herself favorable to it, but is so anxious for it that I only await the arrival of Monsieur d'Épinay. The following day the contract will be signed." A deep sigh escaped the young man, who gazed long and mournfully at her he loved. "Alas," replied he, "it is dreadful thus to hear my condemnation from your own lips. The sentence is passed, and in a few hours will be executed. It must be so, and I will not endeavour to prevent it. But since you say nothing remains but for Monsieur d'Épinay to arrive, that the contract may be signed, and the following day you will be his. Tomorrow you will be engaged to Monsieur d'Épinay, for he came this morning to Paris." Valentine uttered a cry. "I was at the house of Monte Cristo an hour since," said Morrel. "We were speaking, he of the sorrow your family had experienced, and I of your grief, when a carriage rolled into the courtyard. Never till then had I placed any confidence in presentiments, but now I cannot help believing them, Valentine. At the sound of the carriage I shuddered. Soon I heard steps on the staircase, which terrified me as much as the footsteps of the commander did Don Juan. The door at last opened. Albert de Morcerf entered first, and I began to hope my fears were in vain, when after him another young man advanced, and the count exclaimed, 'Ah, here is Baron Franz d'Épinay!' I summoned all my strength and courage to my support. Perhaps I turned pale and trembled, but certainly I smiled. 5 minutes after I left, without having heard one word that had passed." "Poor Maximilien!" murmured Valentine. "Valentine, the time has arrived when you must answer me, and remember my life depends on your answer. What do you intend doing?" Valentine held down her head. She was overwhelmed. "Listen," said Morrel. "It is not the first time you have contemplated our present position, which is a serious and urgent one. I do not think it is a moment to give way to useless sorrow. Leave that for those who like to suffer at their leisure, and indulge their grief in secret. There are such in the world, and God will doubtless reward them in heaven for their resignation on earth. But those who mean to contend must not lose one precious moment, but must return immediately the blow which fortune strikes. Do you intend to struggle against our ill fortune? Tell me, Valentine, for it is that I came to know." Valentine trembled and looked at him with amazement. The idea of resisting her father, her grandmother, and all the family had never occurred to her. "What do you say, Maximilien?" asked Valentine. "What do you mean by a struggle?" "Oh, it would be a sacrilege." "What? I resist my father's order and my dying grandmother's wish? Impossible!" Morrel started. "You are too noble not to understand me, and you understand me so well that you already yield, dear Maximilian. No, no, I shall need all my strength to struggle with myself and support my grief in secret, as you say, but to grieve my father, to disturb my grandmother's last moments, never." "You are right," said Morrel calmly. "In what a tone you speak!" cried Valentine. "Speak as one who admires you, mademoiselle." "Mademoiselle!" cried Valentine. "Mademoiselle! Oh, selfish man! He sees me in despair, and pretends he cannot understand me." "You mistake. I understand you perfectly. You will not oppose Monsieur Villefort, you will not displease the marchioness, and tomorrow you will sign the contract which will bind you to your husband." "But, mon Dieu, tell me, how can I do otherwise?" "Do not appeal to me, mademoiselle. I shall be a bad judge in such a case. My selfishness will blind me," replied Morrel, whose low voice and clenched hand announced his growing desperation. "What would you have proposed, Maximilian? Have you found me willing to accede?" "It is not for me to say." "You are wrong. You must advise me what to do." "Do you seriously ask my advice, Valentine?" "Certainly, dear Maximilian, for if it is good, I will follow it. You know my devotion to you." "Valentine," said Morrel, pushing aside a loose plank, "give me your hand in token of forgiveness of my anger. My senses are confused, and during the last hour the most extravagant thoughts have passed through my brain. Oh, if you refuse my advice——" "What do you advise?" said Valentine, raising her eyes to heaven and sighing. "I am free," said Maximilian, "and rich enough to support you. I swear to make you my lawful wife before my lips even shall have approached your forehead." "You make me tremble," said the young girl. "Follow me," said Morrel. "I will take you to my sister, who is worthy also to be yours. We will embark for Algiers, for England, for America, or if you prefer it, retire to the country, and only return to Paris when our friends have reconciled your family." Valentine shook her head. "I fear it, Maximilian," said she. "It is a counsel of a madman. I should be more mad than you, did I not stop you at once with the word, 'Impossible, impossible!'" "You will then submit to what fate decrees for you without even attempting to contend with it?" said Morrel sorrowfully. "Yes, if I die." "Well, Valentine," resumed Maximilian, "I can only say again that you are right. Truly, it is I who am mad, and you prove to me that passion blinds the most well-meaning. I appreciate your calm reasoning. It is then understood that tomorrow you will be irrevocably promised to Monsieur Franz d'Épinay, not only by that theatrical formality invented to heighten the effect of a comedy, called the signature of the contract, but your own will." "Again you drive me to despair, Maximilian," said Valentine. "Again you plunge the dagger into the wound. What would you do, tell me, if your sister listened to such a proposition?" "Mademoiselle," replied Morrel with a bitter smile, "I am selfish, you have already said so, and as a selfish man I think not of what others would do in my situation, but of what I intend doing myself. I think only that I have known you not a whole year. From the day I first saw you, all my hopes of happiness had been in securing your affection. One day you acknowledged that you loved me, and since that day my hope of future happiness has rested on obtaining you, for to gain you would be life to me. Now I think no more. I say only that fortune has turned against me. I had thought to gain heaven, and now I have lost it. It is an everyday occurrence for a gambler to lose not only what he possesses, but also what he has not." Morrel pronounced these words with perfect calmness. Valentine looked at him a moment with her large, scrutinizing eyes, endeavoring not to let Morrel discover the grief which struggled in her heart. "But in a word, what are you going to do?" asked she. "I am going to have the honor of taking my leave of you, mademoiselle, solemnly assuring you that I wish your life may be so calm, so happy, and so fully occupied, that there may be no place for me even in your memory." "Oh," murmured Valentine. "Adieu, Valentine, adieu," said Morrel, bowing. "Where are you going?" cried the young girl, extending her hand through the opening, and seizing Maximilian by his coat, for she understood from her own agitated feelings that her lover's calmness could not be real. "Where are you going?" "I am going, that I may not bring fresh trouble in your family, and to set an example which every honest and devoted man, situated as I am, may follow." "Before you leave me, tell me what are you going to do, Maximilian?" The young man smiled sorrowfully. "Speak, speak," said Valentine, "I entreat you." "Has your resolution changed, Valentine?" "It cannot change, unhappy man. You must know it must not," cried the young girl. "Then adieu, Valentine." Valentine shook the gate with a strength of which she could not have been supposed to be possessed. As Morrel was going away, and passing both her hands through the opening, she clasped and wrung them. "I must know what you mean to do," said she. "Where are you going?" "Oh, fear not," said Maximilian, stopping at a short distance. "I do not intend to render another man responsible for the rigorous fate reserved for me. Another might threaten Monsieur Franz to provoke him, and to fight with him. All that would be folly. What has Monsieur Franz to do with it? He saw me this morning for the first time, and has already forgotten he has seen me. He did not even know I existed when it was arranged by your two families that you should be united. I have no enmity against Monsieur Franz, and promise you the punishment shall not fall on him." "On whom, then? On me?" "On you, Valentine! Oh, heaven forbid! Woman is sacred. The woman one loves is holy. On yourself, then, unhappy man, on yourself." "I am the only guilty person, am I not?" said Maximilian. "Maximilian," said Valentine, "Maximilian, come back, I entreat you." He drew near with a sweet smile, and but for his paleness, one might have thought him in his usual happy mood. "Listen, my dear, my adored Valentine," said he in his melodious and grave tone. "Those who like us have never had a thought for which we need blush before the world. Such may read each other's hearts. I never was romantic, and am no melancholy hero. I imitate neither Manfred nor Anthony, but without words, protestations, or vows, my life has entwined itself with yours. You leave me, and you are right in doing so. I repeat it, you are right, but in losing you, I lose my life. The moment you leave me, Valentine, I am alone in the world. My sister is happily married. Her husband is only my brother-in-law, that is, a man whom the ties of social life alone attach to me. No one then longer needs my useless life. This is what I shall do. I will wait until the very moment you are married, for I will not lose the shadow of one of those unexpected chances which are sometimes reserved for us, since Monsieur Franz may, after all, die before the time. A thunderbolt may fall even on the altar as you approach it. Nothing appears impossible to one condemned to die, and miracles appear quite reasonable when his escape from death is concerned. I will then wait until the last moment, and when my misery is certain, irremediable, hopeless, I will write a confidential letter to my brother-in-law, another to the prefect of police, to acquaint them with my intention, and at the corner of some wood, on the brink of some abyss, on the bank of some river, I will put end to my existence, and certainly, as I am the son of the most honest man who ever lived in France." Valentine trembled convulsively. She loosened her hold of the gate, her arms fell by her side, and two large tears rolled down her cheeks. The young man stood before her, sorrowful and resolute. "Oh, for pity's sake," said she, "you will live, will you not?" "No, on my honor," said Maximilian. "But that will not affect you. You have done your duty, and your conscience will be at rest." Valentine fell on her knees and pressed her almost bursting heart. "Maximilian," said she, "Maximilian, my friend, my brother on earth, my true husband in heaven, I entreat you, do as I do, live in suffering. Perhaps we may one day be united." "Adieu, Valentine," repeated Morrel. "My God!" said Valentine, raising both her hands to heaven with a sublime expression, "I have done my utmost to remain a submissive daughter. I have begged, entreated, implored. He has regarded neither my prayers, my entreaties, nor my tears. It is done," cried she, wheeling away her tears and resuming her firmness. "I am resolved not to die of remorse, but rather of shame. Live, Maximilian, and I will be yours. Say, when shall it be? Speak, command, I will obey." Morrel, who had already gone some few steps away, again returned, and pale with joy, extended both hands towards Valentine through the opening. "Valentine," said he, "dear Valentine, you must not speak thus, rather let me die. Why should I obtain you by violence if our love is mutual? Is it from mere humanity you bid me live? I would then rather die." "Truly," murmured Valentine, "who on this earth cares for me if he does not? Who has consoled me in my sorrow but he? On whom do my hopes rest? On whom does my bleeding heart repose? On him, always on him. Yes, you are right, Maximilian. I will follow you. I will leave the paternal home. I will give up all. Oh, ungrateful girl that I am!" cried Valentine, sobbing. "I will give up all, even my dear old grandfather, whom I had nearly forgotten." "No," said Maximilian, "you shall not leave him. Monsieur Noirtier has evinced, you say, a kind feeling towards me. Well, before you leave, tell him all. His consent would be your justification in God's sight. As soon as we are married, he shall come and live with us. Instead of one child, he shall have two. You have told me how you talk to him, and how he answers you. I shall very soon learn that language by signs, Valentine, and I promise you solemnly that instead of despair, it is happiness that awaits us." "Oh, see, Maximilian, see the power you have over me. You almost make me believe you, and yet what you tell me is madness, for my father will curse me. He is inflexible. He will never pardon me. Now listen to me, Maximilian. If by artifice, by entreaty, by accident, in short, if by any means I can delay this marriage, will you wait?" "Yes, I promise you, as faithfully as you have promised me that this horrible marriage shall not take place. And if you are dragged before a magistrate or a priest, you will refuse." "I promise you by all that is most sacred to me in the world, namely by my mother." "We will wait then," said Morrel. "Yes, we will wait," replied Valentine, who revived at these words. "There are so many things which may save unhappy beings such as we are." "I rely on you, Valentine," said Morrel. "All you do will be well done, only if they disregard your prayers. If your father and Madame de Saint-Meran insist that Monsieur d'Épinay should be called tomorrow to sign the contract, then you have my promise, Maximilian. Instead of signing, I will go to you, and we will fly." But from this moment until then, let us not tempt Providence. Let us not see each other. It is a miracle, it is a providence that we have not been discovered. If we were surprised, if it were known that we met thus, we should have no further resource. You are right, Valentine, but how shall I ascertain? From the notary, Monsieur Deschamps. I know him, and for myself, I will write to you. Depend on me. I dread this marriage, Maximilian, as much as you. Thank you, my adored Valentine, thank you. That is enough. When once I know the hour, I will hasten to the spot. You can easily get over this fence with my assistance. A carriage will await us at the gate, in which you will accompany me to my sister's, there living, retired, or mingling in society, as you wish. We shall be enabled to use our power to resist oppression, and not suffer ourselves to be put to death like sheep, which only defend themselves by sighs. Yes, said Valentine, I will now acknowledge you are right, Maximilian. And now, are you satisfied with your betrothal? Said the young girl sorrowfully. My adored Valentine, words cannot express one half of my satisfaction. Valentine had approached, or rather had placed her lips so near the fence that they nearly touched those of Morrel, which were pressed against the other side of the cold and inexorable barrier. Adieu, then, till we meet again, said Valentine, tearing herself away. I shall hear from you? Yes. Thanks, dear love, adieu. The sound of a kiss was heard, and Valentine fled through the avenue. Morrel listened to catch the last sound of her dress brushing the branches, and of her footstep on the gravel, then raised his eyes with an ineffable smile of thankfulness to heaven for being permitted to be thus loved, and then also disappeared. The young man returned home, and waited all the evening and all the next day without getting any message. It was only on the following day, about 10 o'clock in the morning, as he was starting to call on Monsieur Deschamps, the notary, that he received from the postman a small billet, which he knew to be from Valentine, although he had not before seen her writing. It was to this effect: "Tears, entreaties, prayers have availed me nothing. Yesterday, for 2 hours, I was at the church of Saint Philippe de Roule, and for 2 hours I prayed most fervently. Heaven is as inflexible as man, and the signature of the contract is fixed for this evening at 9 o'clock. I have but one promise, and but one heart to give. That promise is pledged to you. That heart is also yours. This evening, then, at 8:45 at the gate. Her betrothed, Valentine de Villefort. P.S. My poor grandmother gets worse and worse. Yesterday her fever amounted to delirium. Today her delirium is almost madness. You will be very kind to me, will you not, Morrel, to make me forget my sorrow in leaving her thus? I think it is kept a secret from Grandpapa Noirtier that the contract is to be signed this evening." Morrel went also to the notary, who confirmed the news that the contract was to be signed that evening. Then he went to call on Monte Cristo, and heard still more. Franz had been to announce the ceremony, and Madame de Villefort had also written to beg the Count to excuse her not inviting him. The death of Monsieur de Saint-Meran and the dangerous illness of his widow would cast a gloom over the meeting, which she would regret should be shared by the Count, whom she wished every happiness. The day before, Franz had been presented to Madame de Saint-Meran, who had left her bed to receive him, but had been obliged to return to it immediately. It is easy to suppose that Morrel's agitation would not escape the Count's penetrating eye. Monte Cristo was more affectionate than ever. Indeed, his manner was so kind that several times Morrel was on the point of telling him all, but he recalled the promise he had made to Valentine, and kept his secret. The young man read Valentine's letter 20 times in the course of the day, It was her first, and on what an occasion! Each time he read it, he renewed his vow to make her happy. How great is the power of a woman who has made so courageous a resolution! What devotion does she deserve from him for whom she has sacrificed everything! How ought she really to be supremely loved! She becomes at once a queen and a wife, and it is impossible to thank and love her sufficiently. Morrel longed intensely for the moment when he should hear Valentine say, "Here I am, Maximilian, come and help me." He had arranged everything from her escape. 2 ladders were hidden in the clover fields. A cabriolet was ordered for Maximilian alone, without a servant, without lights. At the turning of the first street they would light the lamps, as it would be foolish to attract the notice of the police by too many precautions. Occasionally he shuddered. He thought of the moment when, from the top of that wall, he should protect the descent of his dear Valentine, pressing in his arms for the first time her of whom he had yet only kissed the delicate hand. End of chapter 73. Part 1. Recording by Lynn Silva.